showed up!
You just lost the Spidey.
You must keep up the pace. There is 30 into the ad.
Uh-oh!
I think you're flying.
Yakuza made the list. It's crazy.
Mother.
I never knew that game existed.
My men are exhausted.
Dynasty
I
Warriors!
need to rest and regroup.
Hello, me. Nothing.
Kind of hypnotic. Oh, God.
That shit freezing. The fuck?
Kind of hypnotic. Oh, God. Big steak.
Ratatouille.
Ain't that, you ferret?
Rough justice, Miami style. Music? Here you go.
SSX, nigga.
Get your pride. For now, you must focus on the enemy that faces you.
I won't be denied next time.
I'm
invincible!
PS2 is the best console.
I know y'all like that!
Hey, you got something to prove?
PS2 is definitely the best console.
That's ice!
I leave off.
Prince of Persia, Two Thrones. Ratchet and Clank.
Hey, fall down before I knock you down!
Why do you shits for Clank?
Back before this battle.
Them in the...
Then arrest me. I must. Get the fuck over here!
I might play Battlefield.
I have come to kill you, Zeus!
Crash Bandicoot, The Wrath of Cortex. That shit's fun. Did it take one? Shaolin Monks, boys. Shaolin Monks so hard with this. I used to hate games that came towards this put Beautiful Joe on this list, I'm the crash. Jet Li. I hate games that run towards the screen, man.
Idiot! You haven't won.
That's some shit I was doing. Yeah. I think I did play this shit before.
You're listening to
SSX, I know I played this bitch.
You know, it's always a good time to snap on stars. And here they are.
Yeah. The type of game you play, you grind, you unlock. Never played this shit. Nice. I never really liked to play a team. Go back to this.
Oh, yeah!
Oh no, that's different. What the fuck? Never played that. Sly Cooper. Who haven't played Sly Cooper, bro? If you never played this fucking game, bro, you have a child. That is my shit. This was my shit. Burnout. The thing about Burnout is all the CPU job is all
Monster Cherry, ready? Fight!
that jam.
Who said this fight was fair?
Whoever made this game definitely went out of business, but we would have bought the sequels. We would have bought the sequels, bruh. I'm talking about we want to see Lil Durk versus goddamn Young Boy, bro. This is SNK? I ain't see it. No, Terry. I ain't never played this shit. Better.
Enemies. I need your help. The enemy's off balance. Good one. Persona.
Is there no other way?
Don't worry, Talum. Believe in yourself.
Destrucción inminente.
¡Atacad! ¡Persona idiota!
Oh, this is different. Jack and Daxter. Oh my god. Yo. What the fuck? I forgot about Jack and Dax. Shit, I'm tripping. I forgot about Jack and Dax. Yes. I can't just go through this shit. Thanks, Mark. Never played this shit, but really like some Zelda type shit. Wow. Yakuza should have been open world. Bully. Sound. Wait. What number this is? Oh, they smoking.
You really pissing me off.
Is it in order? Oh, no, they just dropping them. I'm about to say.
You really pissing me off.
Tarzan's lit. Oh yeah, I fuck with Tarzan. This shit was fun. This shit was fun.
Connor.
They did that.
Spider-Man! I should have known this was going too easy.
Spider-Man got a plan for a while.
See ya! Fire!
say before he hit him. Just for the
boss says you're just a man.
Video, you know. Why you gotta be shooting that Haitian? My people dirty.
God of time, I bear tokens, pain and suffering. Come closer.
My head! It's killing me!
Nah, I'ma do my own thing.
I use the bathroom. Fuck, I use the bathroom.
That's it, Mumble. Good job. Yahoo! Follow those feathers.
Eliminate him! Run that safe key! I hate spiders! This whole next time we combine, it's just nobody can do it like you. Those things you know you can. They can't test the best of this. Go with a soul and walk around and make up on the chest of this.
Yeah, man, why don't you just retire? Or we just skated on the defense. Taste that.
Come on.
Come on, baby. Show me what you got.
Final round.
Come on.
何やってんの?
Oi, oi.
Oh, I swallowed my gum.
I'll skewer you!
Fight!
This time you're going to pay! Frieza! It's over! Too bad!
Yes, sir. He sure knows his way around the track.
I missed out on the whole fucking list, man.
To the meltdown.
I'm getting sued. Who the fuck is that? Mortal Kombat 25. Gorgeous PS1 games. Say gorgeous. Cancel Sonic games. Miami Drug War. Yeah, man. What the fuck?
In February 2013, Sly Cooper came home after 8 years away. 8 years of fans wondering if the raccoon thief they grew up with was ever coming back. He returned. New game, new studio, new story. And for a moment, it felt like everything was going to be okay. Then the game ended. Sly was stranded in ancient Egypt, separated from his gang, separated from everything. The developers had planned a DLC episode to bring him home. Sony cancelled it. And that was the last time anyone saw Sly Cooper. No big finale, no emotional goodbye, just silence. Since then, a film was announced and quietly buried. A television series was revealed to the world and then vanished without a single frame ever being shown. The studio that created him told us recently that barely 1 in 10 of their employees would even want to go back. And the studio that tried to continue his story was shut down 4 months ago. Sly Cooper didn't retire. He didn't get cancelled. He didn't fade out gracefully like so many PlayStation mascots before him. He disappeared. And the full story is far more tragic than most people realize.
This came out 4 months ago. No, this came out 5 months ago.
In 1997, a software engineer named Chris Zimmerman sat at his desk at Microsoft and made a decision. He was good at his job, the pay was fine, the career path was clear, and yet he was completely miserable. Zimmerman was a gamer. He had always been a gamer, and somewhere between the spreadsheets and the product meetings, he had come to the conclusion that making productivity software for the rest of his life was not something he was prepared to do. He went to two colleagues, Brian Fleming and Bruce Oberg, and told them he wanted to start a video game company. They said yes almost immediately. They brought in three more, Daryl Plank, Tom Saxton, and Kathy Saxton. And in October 1997, 6 people walked away from one of the most stable employers in America to go make games in Bellevue, Washington. They needed a name. Zimmerman brought a shortlist home to his wife. She looked it over and told him she didn't mind what they chose, as long as it wasn't Sucker Punch. That was all he needed to hear. Their first game was Rocket, Robot on Wheels, a Nintendo 64 platformer released in 1999. Charming, technically accomplished, reviewed well, and almost completely ignored. The timing was brutal. The Nintendo 64 was already in its final years, the PlayStation was dominating, and a small game from an unknown studio barely registered. But it was enough to prove they could ship something, enough to get a meeting. In 2000, Sucker Punch signed exclusively with Sony, and they started building something new. This was the PlayStation 2 era, and if you were a gamer in the early 2000s, you already know what that means. The PS2 was the most successful games console ever made. It wasn't just winning the hardware war, it was completely redefining what video games could be to a new generation of young people. And at the center of that world was the mascot platformer. Crash Bandicoot's golden era under Naughty Dog had come and gone. Jak and Daxter had just launched, Ratchet and Clank were months away. The PS2 platformer was the genre that mattered, and Sony knew it. Sucker Punch wanted a piece of it, but they had a problem. They wanted to build a game around a thief, a proper thief, charming, skilled, living outside the law, the kind of character you'd find in a heist film. Cool under pressure, always 3 steps ahead, but nobody had ever successfully made a criminal the hero of a family platformer before, because a thief is a criminal and children aren't supposed to root for criminals. The writing team worked the problem until they found the answer. Sly Cooper would only steal from other criminals. The Cooper clan, a long dynasty of master thieves stretching back through history, had built their entire code around it. They took from the people who deserved to lose what they had, like Robin Hood with a striped tail and a cane. And that one decision reframed everything. The world built around him matched the character completely. While Ratchet was blasting across alien planets and Jak was sprinting through seamless open jungles, Sly moved differently. Quietly. Every level was a puzzle as much as a platform. Guards had patrol patterns to memorize. Shadows offered cover. One wrong move and it was over. Sly could only take a single hit before he went down. The official US PlayStation magazine would later describe it as a mix between one-hit kill arcade action and Splinter Cell sneaking. While most platformers of the era chased chaos and slapstick, Sly Cooper carried himself with unusual restraint. Jazz music, stealth, heists, rooftop silhouettes at midnight. Even as a kid, it felt cool in a way few platformers did. The visual style was its own kind of statement, cel-shaded and film noir tinged, rendered like a Saturday morning cartoon that felt like true cinema. The gang's hideout, the Binocucom, Bentley running tactical support through an earpiece, nervous and brilliant, Murray, all heart, all muscle, deeply loyal, and Carmelita Fox, the Interpol inspector who pursued Sly across the world, furious at what he was, unable to stop caring about who he was. It wasn't just a game with good mechanics, it had an ensemble, characters with history and warmth and genuine relationships. You weren't just playing a level, you were part of something. Nate Fox, who designed and wrote the first game, and would go on to shape every arrived in September 2004, and from the moment it launched, it was clear that something had changed. Not just improved, fundamentally rethought. The first game had been a linear platformer, tight levels, one character, get to the end. Sly 2 threw that blueprint out entirely. The world opened up. Each chapter dropped the Cooper gang into a sprawling hub environment. Paris rooftops, an Indian palace, a Canadian logging operation, and gave you the freedom to move through it however you wanted. Bentley and Murray became fully playable for the first time. Sly handled the stealth, Bentley handled the infiltration, Murray handled anything that needed to be hit very hard. 3 characters, 3 playstyles, 1 gang pulling one job together. Brian Fleming, the studio's co-founder and producer, said the team had landed on a single premise early in development that guided everything. Sly and the gang worked together to pull off a string of big heists. That was it. That was the whole game, and they never lost sight of it. The influence was deliberate. Nate Fox described the heists as being drawn from classic Hollywood, the kind of movies where every member of the crew has a role, where the plan always goes sideways in the third act, where the tension comes not from the combat, but from the execution. Sly 2 felt less like a platformer and more like a caper, a game that trusted its audience to care about the characters enough to invest in the plan before the chaos began. It worked. Critically, it was embraced as a significant step forward from the original. Fans regarded it then, and regard it now, as the pinnacle of what the series could be. To this day, if you ask a Sly Cooper fan which game they'd hand to someone who had never played the series, the answer is almost always Sly 2. Sly 3, Honor Among Thieves, followed in September 2005. The ambition grew again. New playable characters joined the game, vehicles, multiplayer, a 3D mode that required special glasses packed in with the game. The story pulled threads of the entire trilogy together. Sly's family history, the Cooper Vault, the cost of a life spent outside the law. It was a conclusion, a proper one, and it landed with the weight of something genuinely earned. 3 games, and a world that had grown richer with each entry. By any measure, Sucker Punch had done what almost no small studio manages to do. They had built a trilogy with a beginning, a middle, and an end. A character who felt complete. A story that had been told. But the sales figure estimates suggest a different story entirely. Sly 1 had sold over 1 million copies. Sly 2 sold just under 1 million. Sly 3 sold around 720,000. Each game reviewed as well or better than the last. Each game received with genuine enthusiasm by the people who played it, and each game reaching fewer people than the one before. Nobody talked about it publicly, there was no alarm raised, no crisis meeting reported, but inside Sony, the numbers said what the reviews didn't. The audience for Sly Cooper was loyal, it just wasn't growing. For a franchise to survive, loyalty isn't enough. You need new people walking through the door. They weren't. Here is the thing about Sucker Punch that makes what happened next so difficult to process. They didn't abandon Sly Cooper, not in any dramatic, public, deliberate sense. There was no falling out with Sony, no creative crisis, no moment where someone stood up in a meeting and said, the character was finished. What happened was more subtle than that. By 2005, the studio had been living inside Sly Cooper's world for the better part of 5 years. 3 games with the same character, the same gang, the same universe, refined and expanded. And somewhere in the middle of all of that, the people who built him had started to wonder what else they were capable of. The PlayStation 3 was coming, and with it, a completely different kind of game. The PS3 represented a generational leap that had felt genuinely seismic at the time. More power, more scale, open worlds that had previously been impossible were suddenly within reach. And Sucker Punch, a studio that believed story and presentation mattered enormously, but that fun was more important than both, looked at what the new hardware could do and felt something pull at them. They wanted to make an open world game, a human game, something grounded and serious and morally complicated in a way that a cartoon raccoon thief, however beloved, could never quite be. The concept that emerged was initially described internally as a superhero version of Animal Crossing. It would evolve over years of development into Infamous, an open world game set in a devastated American city, built around a man who had accidentally become something more than human and had to decide what to do about it. Dark, ambitious, completely unlike anything Sucker Punch had made before. Sly Cooper was a children's game. Infamous was not, and the studio that had built one was now entirely focused on the other. This wasn't a betrayal, this was evolution. A small studio of talented people looking at a new generation of hardware and asking themselves what they were truly capable of. That's not an uncommon story in the industry, and in most cases, it's the right call. Studios that stay comfortable don't grow. Sucker Punch wanted to grow, but growth has consequences. The question of what happened to Sly Cooper was answered not with a statement, but with a silence. No farewell tour, no final words on the character's future, just a studio moving forward. Stepping through a door into a different kind of ambition, making a different kind of game for a different kind of audience. Sly Cooper and the Thievius Raccoonus had launched in 2002, with Nate Fox terrified that nobody would want a wacko game about a raccoon thief. By the time Infamous entered development, that wacko game had 1 million fans and no one making the next one. Sony still owned the IP, the character still existed, but the people who understood him, who had invented his voice and his world and his code of honor, were gone. And Sony faced a choice. Let Sly Cooper disappear quietly, or hand him to someone else and hope for the best. They chose to hand him over. Sanzaru Games was not an obvious choice. In 2010, when Sony began looking for a studio to carry Sly Cooper forward, Sanzaru were a small team based in San Jose, California, with a modest portfolio and almost no public profile. They had made a handful of minor titles. They were not, by any conventional measure, the kind of studio you hand a beloved franchise to. But they had something that mattered more than a portfolio. They loved Sly Cooper. Genuinely, deeply, personally. These were people who had grown up with the games, who understood the character not as an intellectual property to be managed, but as something that had meant something to them. When the opportunity came to work on a remaster of the original trilogy for PlayStation 3, they approached it with the kind of care that only comes from that kind of intimate knowledge of the character and world. The Sly Collection launched in November 2010. 3 games remastered in high definition with trophy support packaged together on a single disc. Sucker Punch publicly praised it. Brian Fleming called Sanzaru's work spectacular, and tucked quietly into the collection, almost as an afterthought, was a teaser. A glimpse of something new, a suggestion that the story wasn't finished. It wasn't a trailer, it wasn't an announcement, just enough to make people wonder. Sony had seen enough. They gave Sanzaru the franchise. What followed was years of development on a game that carried more weight than any of its makers probably fully understood. Sly Cooper, Thieves in Time, was not just the 4th game in a series. It was an answer to a question that fans had been asking for nearly 8 years. It was proof the character still had a future, and it was being built by a team that had never made anything close to this scale before. Thieves in Time arrived in February 2013, and it brought Sly back with genuine affection. The cel-shaded world was intact. The banter between Sly, Bentley, and Murray felt warm and earned. The concept? Traveling through time to meet Sly's ancestors, each one a different kind of thief from a different era, was inventive and gave the game a variety that kept it moving. Critics responded positively, an 80 on Metacritic, a respectable return for a franchise that had been silent since 2005. But the fans were more complicated. Some loved it, some found it too easy, too safe, too content to coast on the goodwill of the trilogy rather than push anywhere genuinely new. And then there was Penelope. Penelope had been introduced in Sly 3 as Bentley's love interest. A mouse, a mechanical genius, a genuine addition to the game. In Thieves of Time, she returned as a traitor, working against the Cooper gang for reasons that felt thin and unconvincing to many who had invested in her character. It was the kind of story decision that divides a fan base permanently. Half the audience accepted it, the other half never forgave it. For some fans, it wasn't just divisive. It fundamentally broke one of the emotional pillars Sly 3 had spent years building. But none of those debates would become the defining legacy of Thieves in Time. Not the difficulty, not the divided reaction, not even Penelope. The thing people ultimately remembered was the ending. Because Thieves in Time did not conclude Sly Cooper's story. It stranded it. The game closed with Sly trapped in ancient Egypt, separated from his gang, separated from his own time, stranded somewhere he had no way out of. It was a cliffhanger, deliberately, consciously constructed as an opening for what came next. Sanzaru had already planned it. Egypt was going to be a DLC episode. The story would continue, Sly would come home. Sony cancelled the DLC before a single piece of it was made. The director of Sanzaru later confirmed it publicly. Egypt was the intention. That was always where the story was going, and they never got to finish it. So the game that was supposed to bring Sly Cooper back instead left him more lost than he had ever been. Stranded in a time and place he didn't belong, with no follow-up coming, no resolution planned, and a fan base that had waited nearly 8 years only to be handed a story with no ending. The last heist had gone wrong, and nobody was coming to fix it. In January 2014, something unexpected happened. Sony announced a Sly Cooper animated film. For a fan base that had been sitting with an unresolved cliffhanger for almost a year, it felt like a lifeline. Not a new game, but something. Proof that the character still mattered. Proof that somebody somewhere still believed in him. A teaser trailer dropped alongside the announcement. The animation had changed, CG rather than the cel shading the games were known for. But the gang was intact. Sly, Bentley, Murray, the Cooper clan, a global heist story based on the original game. The studio behind it was Rainmaker Entertainment, the same Vancouver animation house that had produced Escape from Planet Earth. The director was Kevin Munro, who had previously directed the 2007 Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles animated film. Sony and Sucker Punch were both involved in an advisory capacity, with the producers confirming that they were working closely with the original creators to make sure the film stayed true to the franchise. There was one complication. Kevin Munro was also simultaneously directing the Ratchet & Clank film. Both projects were running at the same time, at the same studio, with the same director. Sly Cooper was always going to have to wait its turn. So it waited. By WonderCon 2016, Munro confirmed that the Sly Cooper film hadn't entered full production yet. It was still in development, still waiting. And the reason it was waiting was sitting in cinemas across the world, hemorrhaging money. The Ratchet & Clank film opened in April 2016. It had a $20 million budget. It made $14.4 million worldwide. The opening weekend placed it 7th at the box office, behind The Jungle Book, which was in its 3rd week of release. Ticket sales dropped 70% the following weekend. Rainmaker Studios took a $10 million impairment charge on the project. And just like that, the Sly Cooper film was over. The cancellation didn't happen all at once. For a while, the project simply stopped moving. In September 2016, Rainmaker's president said publicly that the Ratchet failure had forced them to rethink the timing, the budget, the entire approach. Munro said he hadn't worked on Sly Cooper in nearly a year and a half. The momentum was gone. The belief was gone. And by the end of 2017, Rainmaker exited the project entirely, selling back the rights, leaving the film without a studio, without a director, without a future. The film that was supposed to give Sly Cooper a second life had been killed. Not by anything wrong with Sly Cooper, but by a different PlayStation game's failure at the box office. He hadn't even been given the chance to fail on his own terms. But Sony wasn't finished. Not quite. In June 2017, the same month Rainmaker walked away, an announcement arrived. A Sly Cooper animated television series was in development. 52 episodes, 11 minutes each. Technicolor Animation Productions in Paris handling production. PGS Entertainment managing distribution. The series was real. It had studios attached. It had an episode count. It had scheduled premiere dates. The first 26 episodes were listed for October 2019. The remaining 26 for July 2020. Fans dared to hope again. The premiere dates came and went. October 2019, nothing. July 2020, nothing. No episodes, no footage, no official explanation. The release dates had appeared briefly on a website and then had been quietly removed within days of being discovered, as though someone had made a mistake by letting them be seen at all. Since then, silence. The series had been removed from both the Technicolor and PGS Entertainment websites sites, no statement has ever been made about its cancellation. No footage has ever been publicly shown. It simply ceased to exist in any visible form. 52 episodes of a Sly Cooper television series were announced to the world, and not 1 second of it has ever been seen. By 2022, Sucker Punch had spent years avoiding the subject of Sly Cooper almost entirely. Not out of resentment, the studio had simply outgrown the franchise that once defined it. When the questions came, and they always came, the answers were careful, measured. The kind of answer that leaves a door technically open, while making very clear that nobody is walking through it anytime soon. In July 2022, Sucker Punch made it official. A blog post, published on the franchise's 20th anniversary, contained a statement that fans had probably already suspected, but had never had confirmed in writing. No studio was currently working on a Sly Cooper project. Sucker Punch had no plans to revisit the franchise, and no other developer had been assigned to it. The character that had launched the studio, the raccoon thief with the cane and the code, 20 years old and with nothing to show for the second half of his life but an unresolved cliffhanger and a television series that had evaporated without explanation. But there was still Sucker Punch, still the people who had built him, and as long as they existed, as long as Brian Fleming and Nate Fox were still there, still making games, still carrying the institutional memory of who Sly Cooper was and why he mattered, there was always the possibility, however remote, however theoretical. Then came the Min-Max interview. In September 2025, Nate Fox sat down with journalist Ben Hansen. The conversation covered a lot of ground. And then Hansen asked the question that Sly Cooper fans had been waiting years for someone to ask directly. What percentage of Sucker Punch employees would actually be excited to make a new Sly Cooper game? Fox didn't hesitate.
What percentage of the studio would say, yeah?
10%?
What?
10%. Hansen expressed shock. Fox elaborated. It had been a long time. The studio had moved on. Ghost of Tsushima had defined a new era for Sucker Punch, had found a new audience, had established a new identity for the studio that had nothing to do with a cartoon raccoon thief on the PlayStation 2. The people who loved Sly Cooper were still there, but they were outnumbered 9-1 by people who had never made a Sly Cooper game and had no particular desire to. 10%. It was the most honest thing anyone connected to Sucker Punch had ever said about Sly Cooper's future, and it was devastating. 4 months later, something else happened, something that received far less attention than it deserved. On January 13th, 2026, Meta shut down Sanzaru Games, the studio that carried Sly Cooper when Sucker Punch wouldn't, the team that had loved the franchise enough to spend years rebuilding it, the people who had planned the Egypt DLC, who had known how the story was supposed to end, who held in their heads the resolution that fans had been waiting 13 years to see. Gone. Absorbed into Facebook's virtual reality ambitions and then discarded when those ambitions collapsed. Whatever Sanzaru knew about where Sly Cooper's story was going, it left with them. And then in December 2025, Brian Fleming announced that he was stepping down as studio head of Sucker Punch after nearly 3 decades. Through Rocket, Robot on Wheels, through the entire Sly Cooper trilogy, through Infamous, through Ghosts of Tsushima, Fleming was moving on. The last founding father of Sly Cooper's studio, passing the keys to a new generation of leadership that had grown up making entirely different kinds of games. The institutional memory was fading. The people who remembered why Sly mattered were leaving. And the studio that remained, talented, successful, celebrated, had a different identity now. One built on samurai open worlds and cinematic action, not cartoon raccoons and gentlemen thieves. Sony still owns Sly Cooper. The IP is protected. The games are still available. The original trilogy was re-released digitally on PlayStation 4 and PlayStation 5 as recently as June 2024. Someone at Sony still believes the name has value. Sucker Punch still hides Easter eggs. Ghosts of Tsushima contains a full hidden tribute to Sly Cooper, a secret trophy that requires players to dress like him. A love letter written in the language of a studio that remembers where it came from, even if it can't go back. And Brian Fleming, in one of his final interviews before stepping down, said, "Never say never," that whatever came next, whether it was continuing Ghost or returning to Sly, The decision was limited only by the studio's commitment to focus and time, that they could only do one thing at a time, but that the door wasn't closed. But doors that are never officially closed can still be impossible to walk through. Sly Cooper had been stranded in ancient Egypt since February 2013. The studio that tried to continue his story no longer exists. The film that could have introduced him to a new generation was killed before it was made. The television series announced to the world vanished without a trace, and the man who built him told us that barely 1 in 10 people in his studio would even want to go back. That is not a death. There has been no funeral, no announcement, no farewell. It's something quieter than that. Over time, Sly Cooper had stopped feeling like a franchise that had ended and started feeling like one that had simply disappeared. Somewhere in ancient Egypt, Sly Cooper is still waiting for the next page of the story, and after 13 years, it's getting harder to believe anyone is ever going to close this chapter. Now it's time for the Dandana Squids discussion, where you get to share your thoughts and opinions on this topic. Do you still believe Sly Cooper's coming back? Or is this the end of the road for the Gentleman Thief? Drop it in the... Over the years, we've seen the rise and fall of many great gaming franchises, and the reason they fade into obscurity varies. There are franchises that died because nobody cared. Publishers pulled the plugs, sales collapsed, and the audience moved on. But that's not this story. Jak and Daxter has one of the most devoted fan bases in PlayStation history. People who grew up with those games don't just remember them, they ache for them. Forums still active, fan petitions still circulating, community is still alive, still waiting 2 decades after the last real game came out. And here's the thing that makes this story genuinely strange. Nobody made a catastrophically wrong decision. The studio that built Jak became the most critically acclaimed developer in PlayStation history. The company that owns him protected the IP perfectly. No licensing disputes, no hostile takeovers, no corporate chaos, no villainous publishers. Everything went right. And somehow, in the middle of all that success, Jak and Daxter just kept getting left behind. Not abandoned by fans, not killed by greed, left behind by greatness, by bigger things. This is the story of how Naughty Dog built one of PlayStation's most beloved franchises and then outgrew it. To understand why losing Jak hurts as much as it does, you first have to understand what made him extraordinary. Many gaming fans have had some interaction with Jak and Daxter over the years, but most people have no idea how close it came to never existing at all, or what it cost to make it real. Cast your mind back to 1999. Naughty Dog had just finished Crash Team Racing, their 4th Crash game in 4 years. 4 classics, 26 million copies sold, the most successful Western developer on the original PlayStation. But underneath that success, something was breaking. Crash Bandicoot didn't belong to them. He never had. Universal owned the IP, and the relationship had deteriorated to the point where Naughty Dog co-founder Jason Rubin later described it as, and I'm quoting directly here, a hostility that was just brutal. So they made a decision. Walk away from Crash, walk away from Universal, and build something new, on their own terms, for a partner they actually trusted. That partner was Sony, and the timing couldn't have been better. Sony wanted Naughty Dog exclusively, wanted to buy the studio outright so they could never make games for a competitor. For Naughty Dog, it was the right deal at the right moment. No more hostile licensing agreements, no more building something brilliant and watching someone else own it. Sony's one condition was simple: build us an IP that belongs to us, not licensed through a third party like Crash was, ours completely, so that never happens again. Naughty Dog agreed, and Sony bought the studio. And the most important consequence of that deal, the one that sometimes falls through the cracks of our memory, is that Jak and Daxter was a Sony IP from day one. No Universal, no hostile corporation waiting to take him when the contract expired. Sony owned him completely from the first moment he existed. On paper, that should have been the thing that saved him. Now, the game itself. While the rest of the team was finishing Crash Team Racing, two programmers quietly broke away to start building something new. They had one central ambition that everyone around them said was impossible for the hardware: a fully seamless 3D open world with 0 loading screens. Not reduced loading, not cleverly disguised loading. 0. They built a custom programming language from scratch to make it work. Game-oriented assembly Lisp, or GOL, and recruited animators from Disney and Nickelodeon to fill the world that they were creating. Art director Bob Raffi pointed to Star Wars, Disney, and Studio Ghibli as the key creative references. The result was a world unlike anything the PS2 had seen. When Jak and Daxter, the precursor legacy, launched in December 2001, it didn't just impress critics, it broke records. Guinness World Records confirmed it held the title of first seamless 3D world in a console game. Metacritic gave it a 90. It sold 2 million copies in the United States alone, but despite its success, almost nobody outside the PlayStation community remembers it due to it being a Sony-owned game. But here's a detail that tells you everything about the ambition behind the game. When Naughty Dog were casting voice actors, Jason Rubin offered Chris Rock $250,000 to voice Daxter. People forget how big of a star Chris Rock was in the early 2000s, and how much money $250,000 was in the early 2000s. But Chris Rock turned them down. George Carlin was approached for Samos the Sage. He also said no. They ended up casting Max Casella, a Sopranos actor, and Rubin later said they were lucky Rock turned them down. Daxter wouldn't have been the same character. Oh, and Jak himself? He doesn't say a single word in the entire first game, not one line. Naughty Dog made him a silent protagonist deliberately. They wanted the player to feel like they were Jak, to inhabit him completely. That decision would become one of the most shocking creative pivots in gaming history, because in the sequel, Jak speaks for the very first time, and his first words are not what anyone expected. It's 2001. The original Jak and Daxter is critically acclaimed, commercially successful, and widely considered one of the finest 3D platformers ever made. The future looks bright. But another game also launched that same year and completely changed the gaming landscape forever. Grand Theft Auto 3. Naughty Dog, by their own admission, didn't see it coming. GTA 3 hit the industry like a bomb, a dark, cinematic, open-world crime game that rewrote what people expected from a console experience. And in the words of one former developer, if you weren't making something like GTA in that moment, most publishers didn't think you were marketable. Naughty Dog looked at the landscape. They looked at their cheerful, colorful, E-rated platformer, and they made a decision that would divide their fanbase permanently. Jak 2 arrived in 2003, and from the opening seconds, it was clear this was not the same game. Jak has been arrested, thrown into prison, experimented on with Dark Eco for 2 years by a corrupt dictator named Baron Praxis. When Daxter finally breaks him out of his cell, Daxter, the same wisecracking sidekick from the first game, pleads with Jak to say something, just this once. And Jak, who never spoke a single word across an entire game, opens his mouth.
I'm gonna kill Praxis!
That moment is one of the most audacious, creative statements any sequel has ever made. In 4 words, Naughty Dog told you everything had changed. The sunny platformer was gone. The silent hero was gone. In his place, a rage-filled young man with dark eco coursing through his veins, capable of transforming into a demon who'd spent 2 years being tortured and had murder on his mind. Some fans were electrified, others never forgave it. Evan Wells, the game's director, was clear about what they were doing. They wanted to expand the audience, reach older players, build something more cinematic, and they succeeded. Jak 2 was technically extraordinary, narratively bold, and mechanically ambitious. But something was also being lost. With each game, the series was declining in sales. Jak and Daxter sold 2 million in the US, Jak 2 sold less, and Jak 3, developed in just 13 months, sold less again. The fanbase was fragmenting between people who wanted the warmth of the original and people who embraced the darker direction. Jak 3 launched in November 2004 and was directly inspired by another Rockstar game, Smuggler's Run. Desert environments, buggy driving, a wasteland setting. Josh Scher, one of the writers, later confirmed Jason Rubin was playing it, and suddenly there was a lot of desert in Jak 3. Jak 3 was also quietly historic for another reason. It was the first Naughty Dog game to involve two people who would go on to shape the studio's entire future. Amy Hennig, who would write Uncharted, and Neil Druckmann, who would create The Last of Us. Both of them showed up at the end of Jak's story, not the beginning. And then came Jak X Combat Racing, a vehicular combat spin-off built quickly on Jak 3's existing assets. By the studio's own admission, it was designed to give the team breathing room between the PS2 era and whatever came next. Breathing room is a polite way of saying, we're done with this. We just don't know what's coming yet. And what was coming was something that would nearly destroy the studio before it made them immortal. In 2004, something significant happened at Naughty Dog that almost nobody outside the industry noticed at the time. Andy Gavin and Jason Rubin left. The two men who had built the studio from a bedroom operation, who had created Crash Bandicoot and Jak and Daxter, who had run Naughty Dog for 18 years, they walked out the door, quietly, deliberately, and handed the keys to a new generation of leadership. They didn't leave because of a scandal. They didn't leave because of a dispute. The deal they signed when Sony acquired the studio was structured for 4 years, and when those 4 years were up, they moved on. They built something extraordinary. Now it was someone else's turn. What came next, by the account of the people who lived through it, were the darkest years in Naughty Dog's history. The PlayStation 3 was arriving, and the PS3 was genuinely unlike anything developers had encountered. Its architecture was extraordinarily complex, a cell processor that required an entirely new approach to programming. Naughty Dog had to build their entire codebase from scratch. Every tool they'd developed across Crash and Jak, gone. Start again. The people who took over from Gavin and Rubin, Evan Wells, Christoph Balestra, Bruce Straley, later documented what happened in The Art of Naughty Dog, and the picture they painted is striking. Their exact words? Dozens of new proposals thrown out, months and months of tool work completely scrapped, and for 3 or 4 months straight, no fewer than one employee quitting every week, as they lost hope we'd pull out of our slump. Every week, for months, people walking out the door because they genuinely didn't believe the studio was going to survive the transition. And it was during this period, this desperate, chaotic scramble to find solid ground, that Jak and Daxter was first sacrificed. Because buried inside those dozens of scrapped proposals was a Jak and Daxter reboot. The team explored reinventing the franchise as a linear storytelling experience, a more cinematic Jak, built for PS3 hardware. It was one of many directions they considered, and then something clicked. The ideas that didn't fit Jak, the realistic human characters, the grounded world, the cinematic narrative, those ideas kept pulling in a different direction, away from the fantasy worlds and towards something more real, something they didn't have a name for yet. They called the project Big, and Big became Uncharted: Drake's Fortune. Released in 2007, the debut of Nathan Drake, the beginning of a franchise that would go on to sell over 40 million copies and become one of PlayStation's most celebrated series of all time. As for Jak, well, he was handed a PSP spin-off instead, The Lost Frontier. Developed by High Impact Games, a studio formed by former Insomniac and Naughty Dog members. They weren't an unknown studio. They'd made well-received Ratchet & Clank handheld games. But The Last Frontier scored a 71 on Metacritic, the lowest in franchise history. A Naughty Dog employee later said directly, "I'm not happy with that being Jak's swan song. I think we could have done a lot better." That was 2009, and it should have been the end of the story. Except Naughty Dog came back to Jak. Not once, not twice, 3 times. Here's what makes the Jak and Daxter story genuinely painful. It wasn't one abandonment, it was 3. Each one more considered than the last, but each one ending the same way. The first you already know. 2006, the PS3 transition, Jak concepts become Uncharted. The studio moved forward, Jak got a PSP game made by someone else. The second came after Uncharted 2. Naughty Dog split into 2 teams, one making Uncharted 3, the other given to Neil Druckmann and Bruce Straley to lead. Their brief was simple: make the next Jak and Daxter. They started down that road, and the further they went, the more they realized they were making something that didn't honor what Jack actually was. In their own words, they weren't doing service to the fans of the franchise, so they stopped and built something else entirely. The Last of Us, a post-apocalyptic survival story about a smuggler and a teenage girl in a world destroyed by a fungal infection. Dark, human, unlike anything Naughty Dog had ever made. The Last of Us went on to receive hundreds of Game of the Year awards. It became a cultural phenomenon, a HBO series, a sequel, a franchise, but Jack? He got nothing. Now the third attempt is the one that cuts the deepest. Between 2010 and 2011, Naughty Dog made one more serious run at a Jack reboot. This time they commissioned concept art from Scribblepad Studios. Detailed, ambitious, fully realized visualizations of what a PS3 Jack and Daxter could look like. A more realistic Jack, grittier environments, a harder world. And as the work developed, the team ran into a question they couldn't answer. In their own words, there were already so many firmly established relationships, character personalities, and character motivations. It became tougher to feel engaged by the prospect of making a new Jack and Daxter. The dilemma they described was this: if we stuck to the constraints of the already established world, would we be happy with the type of game we were about to make? If we diverged too greatly from those constraints, were we actually making Jack and Daxter anymore? They couldn't answer it, so they walked away again. The concept art was never meant to be seen publicly, but it leaked in 2014, and when fans finally got a look at what a Jack 4 might have been, a hyper-realistic, gritty reimagining completely unlike the games they'd grown up with, many of them understood immediately why Naughty Dog had walked away. It wasn't Jack. Not really. It was Naughty Dog trying to make a Jack game, realizing they'd become a different studio, and being honest enough to stop, which brings us to where we are now. Because the story doesn't end with abandoned concept art. It ends with something far stranger. In December 2024, Naughty Dog took the stage at the Game Awards and revealed their next project, a brand new IP, a sci-fi action game called Intergalactic: The Heretic Prophet. And within hours, the Jack and Daxter community noticed something. The giant robot at the end of the reveal trailer, the formidable mechanical enemy looming over the protagonist, bore a striking visual resemblance to robots in the cancelled Jack 4 concept art. Side by side, the silhouettes are almost identical. Now, whether that's intentional recycling of old ideas or pure coincidence, nobody at Naughty Dog has confirmed, but it tells you something about where Jack ends up in the end. Not as a game, as a ghost, haunting the edges of every new thing Naughty Dog builds, never quite materializing into something real. And here's what makes that harder to accept. Sony owns Jack and Daxter. There is no licensing dispute to resolve, no hostile corporation to negotiate with. The IP is sitting in Sony's library, perfectly preserved, waiting. Sony could greenlight a Jack game tomorrow. They have the asset, they have the audience, they have the technology. What they apparently don't have is the will. In 2019, a team at Sanzaroo Games, the studio behind Sly Cooper, Thieves in Time, assembled quietly and built a pitch for a Jack and Daxter remaster. They recreated the opening cutscene of the original game shot for shot in modern graphics to show Sony exactly what it could look like. They presented it, Sony passed. Sanzaroo Games was shut down in January 2026. The footage of that pitch surfaced publicly just months later, and watching it, you can see exactly what fans had been asking for: a loving, faithful reimagining that understood what made the original special. But Sony said no. Bluepoint Games, the studio behind the critically acclaimed Demon's Souls remake and Shadow of the Colossus, reportedly also pitched a Jack and Daxter remake at some point. Bluepoint was shut down by Sony in 2025. Two studios, both passionate about Jack, both making the case that the audience is there, both gone. Meanwhile, Jack and Daxter, the precursor legacy, was added to PlayStation Plus Premium in late 2024, updated with modern emulation features like save states and rewind, which is something. Sony knows the game exists, they're maintaining it, they're just not building on it. And when you look at what Sony has on its plate, Naughty Dog deep in Intergalactic and The Last of Us Part 3, the studio's bandwidth completely consumed, the honest answer is that Jack isn't being actively rejected. He's just not the priority He's never the priority. He's PlayStation's most beloved waiting room franchise. The IP that everyone agrees deserves better, and nobody quite gets around to giving it. The fans though? The fans never left. When I asked my audience what franchise they wanted me to cover next, given a list that included Ratchet & Clank, COD Zombies and others, the overwhelming majority voted for Jak and Daxter. Not a current franchise, not something with a new game on the horizon, a series that last released a game when most of my audience were in primary school. That's not just nostalgia, that's something deeper. That's the feeling of something unfinished, something that deserved a proper ending and never got one. Jak and Daxter wasn't abandoned because it failed. It was abandoned because everything around it succeeded. Every time Naughty Dog stood at a crossroads, Jak or something new, they chose something new. And every time, that choice turned out to be right. Uncharted was right, The Last of Us was right, and maybe Intergalactic will be right too.
Games that ended up killing the studio that they came from. Ready, set, go. Remember the big old Saints Row reboot a few years ago? The Saints Row series was pretty awesome, and it was developed by Volition. And you know what? If this reboot would have released outside of the vacuum of it being a reboot of Saints Row, like it was like its own brand new IP releasing for the first time, it probably would have scored maybe like 10 points higher than what it scored with typical Metacritic reviews, scoring in the low 60s. On its own, it's a very basic 7 out of 10 game maybe. As a Saints Row game, it is straight up offensive to the Saints Row legacy. We could go on and on and on about Saints Row's reboot and how it doesn't live up to what the original 3 games, I guess you could say 4 or even 4.5 games were, which is wild because Saints Row jumps the shark multiple times throughout its series. Saints Row Reboot very much so was branded as a game that was going to return to the roots of Saints Row. A lot of people were optimistic that the reboot would make things feel like the Saints Row 2 and Saints Row 3 days, where with Saints Row 2, it took things pretty seriously, though sometimes it would go a little bit over the top. Saints Row 3 would have its over the top moments, but still kept things rooted and grounded, enough so at the very least there was a floor. Sure, things go off the rails with 4 and Gat Out of Hell, but at that point, we had enough time rooted to the ground where at least we were still invested in the characters and the world to an extent. What's weird about the reboot, though, was that this game didn't even really jump the shark. It just wasn't good. Repetitiveness aside, my biggest issue with Saints Row was the cringy writing.
Seriously, how's the job?
It's the murder business. Fundamentals don't change, just the uniform.
I can tell you love it.
Okay, I don't have to love it, I have to pay my student loans.
Amen.
Why are they talking about like the main character needing to pay student loans and that he kills people for money? If he's a career criminal, why is he worried about how he's gonna pay his student loans back? Like, bro, like that is not a priority. You're not paying your loans if you're a criminal. I don't know. And that right there, that's like just in the beginning of the game. That sets the tone though for what you experience over and over and over throughout the Saints Row rebooted campaign. It doesn't really have a legacy tying things back to the old games, not even really thematically outside of a few Easter eggs. The sandbox world was actually pretty cool. I think that they did a good job building out the world, which would have made the rest of the game relatively easy to land pretty well, I think. But instead, they just had some of the worst writing I've ever seen in a AAA game like this. And that's saying a lot because there's some games that have really bad writing out there. But I really do think that the Saints Row writing just like makes you want to, I don't know, curl your toenails up in some weird way. I don't know. And after Saints Row did finally launch and it was received pretty mixed and it did pretty poorly in sales, right away, the studio would start seeing layoffs and things would really only get worse from there. Now, the company that owned Volition, Embracer, did try to move things around and keep the company going for a little while, but ultimately Embracer would fall into some pretty serious financial troubles themselves, ones that we'll go into later on in this video. But the big takeaway is that when Embracer had to really start cutting cost spending across the board about a year or so after Saints Row's reboot launched, Volition was not in a good position to be saved and get to stay open. And thus the Saints Row reboot that was supposed to revive the franchise ended up killing the development studio. Nowadays, when you think of first-party titles from the big 3 video game consoles, a lot might come to mind, like God of War or Last of Us for PlayStation, literally anything under the sun for Nintendo. And honestly, anything they put out can easily become a mascot for them. And the memory of when Halo was good for Xbox. But I want to specifically look at the generation of the PlayStation 3, Xbox 360, and Wii. Because if you guys remember, the PlayStation 3 was off to a little bit of a bumpy start during that generation.
PS3, I'll just keep playing my 360.
this song has helped you understand. Now you know how you killed your brand.
And while they definitely had some really big, heavy-hitting first-party games during that era, in 2007, Sony published a game that was potentially supposed to be another one of their big, heavy-hitting first-party self-published games. A game that flopped so hard, I literally didn't even know that it existed until I was just randomly doing research on different game studios for this video, and I didn't realize that this was a game, and it was really big. Has anyone out there actually played the game Lair? This game released at the end of the year in 2007, almost a year after the PlayStation 3's launch, and was set up to hopefully be a big holiday selling game. And who knows, maybe it would have opened doors for the game to potentially become a big franchise. And it was developed by none other than Factor 5, who had a really good reputation and a really good track record, and they were really famous for their work on the Rogue Squadron series during the previous generation of consoles. And on top of that, they had some technology that was being implemented in various games throughout the years as well. But from 2003 until the release of Lair in 2007, they released 0 new games. So they were cooking up something big, right? And Lair, visually speaking, looked very impressive, which of course caused the game to get a lot of hype. I mean, this was the next generation in full swing, and I mean, look how visually impressive this is. Mind you, imagine this is like 2007 and you're looking at this. But then, when the game came out, people realized that the visuals were kind of the only thing that the game had going for it, because the gameplay itself was rough. You see, the PlayStation 3 era introduced the 6-axis controller, a controller that had motion controls, yay. And it wasn't like in the fun way how the Wii did it. This was like with a weird controller, and it was just like a game that probably could have just played fine with a normal controller. But if you wanted to like turn left, you had to tilt the controller left. You wanted to dive, you had to tilt it forward. If you wanted to roll, you had to like twist your wrists, and it just, I don't know, a whole lot of the gameplay seems to at least be mostly like trying to correct the game's controls, making things weird. There was apparently a whole controversy even when the game started getting the reviews that were bad for the game, and apparently Sony ended up sending out like a big stack of like guides for the reviewers to like maybe change their opinion and try to understand the controls and what they were trying to do with the game better, which is weird. And at launch, you could only play with the motion controls, though they did roll out an update later that allowed you to play with analog sticks, thank God. But this is just one of those cases where the game being bad hurts because of how great everything else looked. I mean, there's this huge scale to the game, and the battles were cinematic, and it looked like they were really ambitious in trying to build out this world and create something awesome. And from what I've heard of the soundtrack, sounds really, really good. So it just stings even worse when the gameplay is just like this. I don't know. And while Lair wasn't developed by an in-house studio belonging to Sony, it was published by Sony, and it was a PS3 exclusive game, I'd bet my damn dollar that had this game done well, Sony would have outright purchased the company, because this was during a time where they were really trying to make these partnerships and really try to step up their games for the following years, because the launch of the PS3 wasn't doing so hot compared to the Xbox 360. But Lair scoring like 3 to 5 out of 10s across the board did not bode too well here. And instead, Factor 5 was quickly running out of money when Lair failed to meet both critical and financial expectations. And ultimately, they ran out of runway within a year of Lair's release, and they ended up shutting down in May of 2009. What's crazy is on top of all of that, there was litigation with former employees after the fact, where apparently Factor 5 didn't pay their employees for the work that they did in November and December. Now, I couldn't find any updates on what happened with this litigation. I assume things got settled out of court, but it was a really big deal and a big story back in 2009 because it was just employees straight up saying that they were defrauded by their company that they worked at. So let's pour one out for the homie Factor 5 that ended up shutting down, and hope we can remember them for their Star Wars Rogue Squadron games and that Indiana Jones and the Infernal Machine game from 1999, because at least that game was kind of fun, even if it was a little mid sometimes.
Do any of you remember this game from 2012? It has a wild story behind it. It all started in 2006. There's this guy, and he's playing for the Red Sox, and he's on track to win his 3rd World Series title with them. But he is also a massive MMO nerd, spending hours on EverQuest and World of Warcraft. And this guy's name is Kurt Schilling. And in 2006, he forms a studio, and that studio, after a couple name changes, became known as 38 Studios, named after his jersey number. And his big dream is to make a World of Warcraft killer. His dream MMO that is gonna be better than any MMO ever. And so that's what 38 Studios starts working on. They make a game internally known as Project Copernicus. And yeah, this is gonna be a big MMO project that's gonna spawn a massive fantasy franchise that's gonna be along the lines of something like Lord of the Rings. Kurt Schilling even believed that this was the start of a billion-dollar company. And he must have really believed this was all gonna work out, because he poured roughly $50 million into the studio, which is a massive amount of his career earnings. And he would hire a lot of creative people from projects that he respected, like they would hire Ken Rolston, the lead designer of Morrowind and Oblivion. So as they're building out this MMO world and this development is going on, in 2009 they buy another company from THQ called Big Huge Games, and they reshape one of the projects that Big Huge Games were working on and turn it into a single-player RPG that will be set in this world of the MMO that they're creating. And that's the game that I was talking about earlier, Kingdoms of Amalur Reckoning. It's not a bad game at all, it's actually pretty good. And I don't think Kingdoms of Amalur Reckoning was supposed to be like a quick cash grab either. Like, they really wanted to flesh out this Amalur fantasy world. And even legendary video game composer Grant Kirkhope was involved in the soundtrack for Kingdoms of Amalur Reckoning. So even for this project, they hired top-tier talent. But the fact that they bought this studio was a massive financial investment, and they already had the main studio, 38 Studios, working on this MMO, and now they had to also finance and take on debt for this other studio that was also eating up cost with developing Kingdoms of Amalur. So they were quickly running out of cash, and they started looking for investors or loans or anything, and eventually in 2010 the state of Rhode Island stepped in and approved a $75 million loan guarantee in exchange for the studio moving to the state and hitting the job creation milestone of 450 employees by 2012. So they were aggressively trying to create jobs in the area. But $75 million are not quite enough to make an MMO, and I mean, there's cancelled MMO projects that have eaten up way more, like the cancelled Halo MMO. And by 2011, reportedly, they had spent over $118 million with zero revenue coming in. And at that point, they were banking on Kingdoms of Amalur Reckoning to sell enough copies to pay off the debt, which was gonna release in 2012, and they just had to hold on a little longer. The thing with that is, though, that just to break even, Kingdoms of Amalur would have had to sell 3 million copies, which is very unlikely for a new IP, especially in 2012. And so, in 2012, it all came crashing down. Firstly, Kingdoms of Amalur Reckoning released, and I mean, review well, and it would sell over 1 million copies in the first couple months, but that was nowhere near the 3 million copies they needed, and there was no funds coming in at this point. And in May of 2012, they used the last $1.1 million they had in the bank for a payment to Rhode Island. And with that, they weren't able to pay anyone anymore, whether that's creditors or employees. So in late May, Schilling sent a single company-wide email laying off nearly 400 employees, and 38 Studios would file for bankruptcy. And with the way the assets were liquidated and split up during the bankruptcy, most of the employees didn't even receive their last paycheck. But it's not like Kurt Schilling just got out of it. He actually was personally responsible for the debt they had taken on, which eventually meant that on top of losing the 15 million that he put in, he also had to sell a bunch of stuff to pay back the debt, like his memorabilia collection, assets that were in gold that were worth millions of dollars, and his 7-bedroom mansion. So at the end of the day, that MMO that they were working on obviously never came out and was cancelled, and the rights to Kingdom of Amalur were auctioned off, and that's how in 2020 a remaster with the title Kingdoms of Amalur Re-Reckoning released. 38 Studios closed down for good, and Big Huge Games shut down for a while as well, but during the bankruptcy auctions, some of the original founders of Big Huge Games bought the trademark for the studio and would later revive it, and they're actually still around and are now part of Nexon. Schilling later revealed that they almost secured a publishing deal and funding for Kingdoms of Amalur 2 in 2012, but the issues with paying the state of Rhode Island, which were public at the time, scared the publisher of a potential Kingdoms of Amalur 2 away. Still, I'm kinda highly doubtful that you know, that would have saved the company at that point. And also he admitted personally that the MMO they were building just wasn't actually fun and that nobody at the office really wanted to even play the game themselves. So yeah, Kingdoms of Amalur is a good game, but it did partly take down 2 studios actually, because yeah, somehow they were banking on this game to be like the next Elder Scrolls or something, which, to put it nicely, is streaming very, very, very big.
I think a great example of a studio that ended up shutting down after just one bad game was definitely Free Radical. Okay, so get this. The minds that created GoldenEye back in the day, they branched out, made their own studio, and then made Time Splitters. Really solid first-person shooter games, by the way. They made the beloved Star Wars Battlefront and Star Wars Battlefront 2, which are still talked about to this day, the original 2. And then they made Haze, the Halo killer for the PS3 that was exclusive originally. And while this specific game wasn't the only reason this studio essentially went under, not once, not twice, but 3 times, kind of, but Haze not performing well did contribute to a pretty big snowball effect that put the studio in a pretty tough position. Now, I think Haze's shortcomings definitely are contributed to the fact that this game was probably marketed in a pretty wild way. You know, like Ubisoft kind of leaned into the whole Halo killer idea for the PS3, and a lot of gaming press outlets picked up on it, which kind of automatically set an impossible bar for Haze to fit into. But the hype definitely created this like a moving target that this game was supposed to fit into, and when the game released, it not only wasn't as good as Halo, but it wasn't even remotely close to the same level as Halo. Mind you, this is 2008. This was like peak Halo 3 era. Now, behind the scenes, there were complications, of course. Early on in development, they wanted to build a brand new engine specifically to be used in Haze. They decided to do this while simultaneously building the game, which, whenever this type of thing happens where they try to build an engine and develop a game at the same time, it seems like there's always issues in the pipeline because you can't, polish things up or experiment with things when the tools are like constantly being updated or they're changing as you're developing things. So I think ultimately this just cut into the amount of time that the developers would have had to polish things up, make things feel more fluid. On top of that, early on, Haze was a game that was planned for PC, 360, and PS3 before it became just a PS3 exclusive. The team struggled with trying to figure out the infamous PS3 cell processor, which was like an issue for the PS3 back in the day. It was just known to be slightly harder to develop for, especially like if you're developing for the 360 and the PC, that's kind of like one thing. But then when you're building something also for the PS3 sometimes can be like a little bit wonky early on, I think. I don't know. I'm not a game developer, so take that as a grain of salt, but that's just like what the rumor mill has spread over the years. If you've developed a game for the PS3 though at some point, let me know if I'm wrong. But from what I can assume and from what interviews tell us, it seems like the fact that the PS3 was making things a little bit harder to get the game running and working and polished and stuff, they had to focus more time on just getting the game, performing well. And they had to try to get it to a stable frame rate, and they couldn't work on things like gameplay or AI and other types of things. By the time the game actually launched, it still had technical issues. I mean, there was like screen tearing, I think. The resolution, I don't think even hit 720p natively, which, I mean, back in the day, that wasn't the biggest deal. It was kind of common, but looking back now, this is supposed to be the Halo killer. How's it killing Halo? I looked it up. It was running in 576p. So definitely not 720p. It was upscaled through the PS3 console, but it's not like true HD. And yeah, 720p was a difficult target to hit. I mean, Halo 3, a year earlier, was not at 720p. It was at 640p. That's still a higher resolution than Haze. And there was just a ton of other things that were hyped up. Like the story was hyped up, but some of the, reveal trailers kind of maybe spoiled some of the game. And then like there was supposed to be this huge like AI thing that was supposed to be cutting edge. And then it turned out to, not be. And Haze definitely was a flop. At least I think it was. And currently it sits at around 55 out of 100 on Metacritic, which in gaming terms is not good. Now VG Charts, which I don't know how accurate it is, claims that this game sold just under 1 million units, which does seem pretty low for a game that had this much hype behind it, but man, that box art was really cool. I don't care about the game anymore. I mean, look at this box art. This is neat. I like it. So, one bad game in Haze, and all hell breaks loose apparently, because this game was hyped up so much that even the industry noticed, and publishers were all of a sudden hesitant to throw their money at games that Free Radical had been working on. Now, Free Radical probably missed out on a lot of money they potentially could have had Haze been a big success, but they were still working away at Star Wars Battlefront 3, and it got canceled. What's interesting is that during the development of Haze, Star Wars Battlefront 3 was in active development, allegedly reaching a 99% completed mark before the plug was pulled, which meant Free Radical was going to be losing out on even more money. Even more so, what's interesting is that we later found out that Star Wars Battlefront 4 was in pre-production and during the concept art phase and had a targeted release date of 2009. So Star Wars Battlefront 3 and then Star Wars Battlefront 4 also got canceled. That's so wild to me. On top of all of this, Free Radical was struggling to secure a publisher for Time Splitters 4. I guess there just wasn't interest there. 2008 was pretty hard already on Free Radical. They were practically bleeding money. And at the end of the year, it was announced that the studio was going to be entering administration, which essentially is bankruptcy. Most of the staff had no idea that the studio was going under. Essentially, employees went to the office and the doors were locked. And then there was security there and notes telling the staff to move to a hotel area. And that's where the employees found out that the company was going under. Majority of the staff ended up essentially being fired. 143 positions were lost, and 40 people got to stay behind to keep the company running because there was still interest from other bigger companies to maybe purchase the studio, which did end up happening. Crytek ended up acquiring the studio, and then from there, the company was renamed to Crytek UK. Now, remember how I said this studio somehow managed to go under 3 times? We've only covered the first one. There's 2 more times, but to understand this even further, it involves another studio that also went under. So we're gonna pause on the whole Free Radical Crytek and come back in a second, because now we have to change gears to fully understand this and talk about Homefront of all games. What is going on here? I don't know what the deal was with early 2010s where just every game franchise was trying to be the blank video game killer. Yeah. By 2011, Call of Duty was already on top, at least for first-person shooters. For whatever reason, THQ was hyping up Homefront and had huge expectations for this game. Killer. Some people online were even discussing as to whether or not this was going to be the Call of Duty killer. I even found this old GameFAQs forum post where people were discussing it. And THQ wasn't really in the best spot at this point, but they were so sure that Homefront was going to save their company and keep things going and potentially position the company to be better than ever. They also spent a ton of money on marketing, including the infamous San Francisco balloon incident, where they released 10,000 red balloons into the San Francisco Bay, which led to environmental concerns and stuff. They were really aggressive with their marketing.
Best trailer winner goes to Homefront.
So then when the game comes out and it's not impressive, or as impressive as the hype built things up to be, people would be more vocal about the game not being as good. I think the biggest criticism at launch was that the game had a 3-hour to 5-hour long campaign for its single player at a $60 price point in 2011. Bro, what's going on? Now the thing is, the game wasn't awful. It actually had a Metacritic score sitting around 70 out of 100 at the time. And that's not necessarily the worst thing ever, but investors were expecting a 90 plus score, something that would compete with Halo or Call of Duty. And as a result, THQ's stock price plummeted 21 to 25% in a single day. Not good to have a huge investor confidence drop after what was supposed to be one of the biggest launches. And then on top of all of that, the multiplayer wasn't actually really all that bad. Just nobody was talking about Homefront after that long because it already had the bad reputation for really dropping the ball with the campaign. And the weird thing is that the game still sold relatively well. I think the numbers were 2.6 million within the first couple of months of the game launching, but apparently that was still significantly below what THQ had expected. They must have been expecting some crazy numbers or something, but okay. With the stock dropping significantly after Homefront, you think they would just leave Homefront alone, but no. THQ wanted to move forward with Homefront 2, the follow-up game. Except something had to be changed, so they ended up closing down Chaos Studios a few months after the launch of Homefront 1. Homefront's development team would be transferred over to THQ Montreal, and in turn, Crytek UK, the Free Radical team that got renamed, after the whole Haze debacle we talked about earlier, they were hired by THQ to develop the sequel to Homefront. You see, during 2011 and into 2012, THQ wasn't doing very well. Red Faction Armageddon did not get good reception. THQ announced that they would shift their focus away from that series. THQ also had a bunch of like kid games, I guess is the right term to use here. It's probably a better term. You know, movie tie-in games, licensed kid series. So in turn, they closed down their THQ Studio Australia and another studio they had called Blue Tongue. And while they're at it, they also closed down THQ Digital Phoenix, which meant they also were dropping their MX vs. ATV franchise that they'd been working on to focus on like the hard-hitting games that were high quality and could help build out an IP. 2011 also saw the release of U-Draw for the PS3 and Xbox 360. That was a commercial failure. That really hurt the finances at THQ. In 2012, THQ reported a net loss of $239 million for that last fiscal year. $100 million more than they lost in the previous year. So to no one's surprise, while I guess you could argue Homefront caused Chaos Studios to go under, overall bad decisions as a publisher caused THQ to go under. THQ reported that they weren't going to be able to pay back this $50 million loan that they got from Wells Fargo, and they're pretty much on the verge of bankruptcy. Their stock price was plummeting. They were really desperate because they also had to delay some games that they had coming up, like Company of Heroes 2 and Metro Last Light. They teamed up with Humble Bundle, of all places, to try to raise more money. Believe it or not, they actually sold 800,000 bundles, which raised like $5 million, which is great, mind you. They made $5 million in like a last-ditch Hail Mary play. And even the president, Jason Rubin, he wanted to show that he was in it with the team. They were in it together and they were going to turn that ship around. He even spent $11,050 on a bundle, you know, just as a sign of goodwill that he was in it to help. And a few days after the Humble Bundle THQ partnership ended, they filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. So THQ did have a lot of IPs, and those ended up getting spread out across a lot of existing publishers already. But the important one to talk about here is Homefront, because Homefront got acquired by Crytek, the developers that were working on Homefront 2. A little later, we would learn that Homefront 2 was actually going to be called Homefront The Revolution, and it was going to be like a reboot to Homefront. Why? It was supposed to be like a reimagining, like completely overhauling the setting and stuff, so I don't know why they had to keep the Homefront name and why they spent $500,000 getting the rights to it, but I digress. Deep Silver, another video game publisher who had been picking up different properties from THQ, also agreed to co-publish this game with Crytek. Here's what I think is the most interesting thing here. Let's back all the way up to Chaos Studios, the development team that made the first Homefront game, and THQ also is responsible for this, but had Homefront 1 been like a polished experience, like had THQ really allocated things properly, given them enough time, enough runway, had the right minds, and the development team was able to execute properly, right? Like it wasn't like a rushed game that wasn't as cool as people hoped it to be, everything would have been different, and Crytek wouldn't have been in the position that they were in by the time that they were working on Homefront The Revolution. I don't know why Crytek decided to purchase the rights to Homefront. I feel like that was a pretty risky play, which would lead to their own downfall, but in a way, Homefront 1 did so poorly, it not only caused the studio to close down, it caused the publisher to close down, and it caused another studio that wasn't even involved in Homefront 1 to eventually close down too. But that was like a snowball effect because, I mean, Crytek did choose to purchase the rights here. During development of Homefront The Revolution, Crytek was faced with a lot of financial issues themselves. By 2014, there were reports circulating around that the company was like missing wage payments. They were like allegedly withholding bonuses. And employees were filing grievances, sometimes not even showing up to work, you know, like out of protest. At first, Crytek straight up denied that any of this stuff was happening. But later on, they kind of were like, we're in this like transitional phase and, you know, we needed to secure some capital for future projects. You know, the whole public-facing wordings that they always use in these types of things.
What does that mean? I need media training.
So after Crytek bought the rights to Homefront, they realized they didn't have enough money, so they decided to sell Homefront before the game was done. So they ended up selling it to Koch Media, I think that's how you pronounce it, Koch Media, who's the parent company of Deep Silver, that company that was going to co-publish this game. That also meant Crytek was no longer developing Homefront: The Revolution. I want to pull my hair out. This is insane. Instead, Deep Silver's studio, Dambuster Studios, would be taking over, and development on that game would be handed off to them. But just to clarify this, to not lead to more confusion, this was Crytek UK, right? The Free Radical design team, not just the overall Crytek team. So it's like the specific team here that was no longer in charge of the game, except it was more confusing because in the acquisition by Deep Silver, they also, I guess, purchased that section of the studio. I don't know how that works, but the company staff was actually pretty unclear early on whether or not the company had been shut down for a while. However, all of the staff ended up getting transferred to that brand new Dambuster Studios under Deep Silver. So they at least didn't lose their jobs, but they got like transferred to a different company in that whole acquisition process after everything. And they did get to continue working on Homefront: The Revolution, at the very least, the game that they had worked on. But the original Free Radical design was officially dead at this point, until it wasn't anymore. Now, you could ask yourself, why did Crytek UK run out of money when they were so confident that they were able to even acquire Homefront: The Revolution in the first place? Well, they had been banking on some other projects they were working on, specifically Crisis 3, which, okay, that's great. They assisted the studio on that one. But they also worked on Warface, that like, I don't know, shooter game that was kind of like a Call of Duty knockoff. I don't think this game ended up becoming nearly as big or blew up nearly as much as people expected it to, but it did last quite a long time before it seemed like updates slowed down. It's just something that kind of existed and people forgot about. I think the fact that Warface didn't like become explosively popular allowed Crytek to not be as important for the future. They weren't able to give themselves the job security that they needed. In 2014, this is so stupid, after Crytek UK shut down and everyone moved to Dambuster Studios or whatever, that was it. Until 2021, when Embracer Group announced, we're going to be opening up Free Radical Design again. We're going to reform it as a subsidiary under Deep Silver. And they were going to bring Time Splitters back to life, which was really exciting. And they had brought back Steve Ellis and David Doak, who were a core part of the original team. And their new studio is going to be based in Nottingham, which is, I guess, where the original Free Radical design opened up. It was pretty cool to have some industry veterans coming back to their franchise after all these years, and they were going to finally make the sequel that people have been wanting for years. So it's weird though, with Time Splitters 4 in development for quite some time. In November 2023, it was reported that the company was set to close down in December. Embracer Group had been restructuring. I guess in 2022, they had established like this $2 billion investment deal into their company. There was some verbal agreements, but it failed to come together, and one of the investing partners walked away from the deal. This then caused Embracer Group's shares to drop dramatically, and in turn, to try to save the company, they announced that they would be closing different studios and also doing a ton of cost-saving measures. Like 904 employees lost their job and at least 15 projects. They also like sold off some of their studios too. It was like a whole thing. And unfortunately, it seemed like Time Splitters 4 and the rebooted Free Radical design would get shut down. This time to no fault of a single game, but just, you know, unfortunate circumstances that were pretty shitty. I don't know.
Coming off the heels of Parade 2017, which was critically acclaimed and was enjoyed by quite a lot of people, Arcane Austin had established themselves as a studio to look out for. Plus, they were part of Bethesda, which obviously is one of the most beloved game companies of all time. And yes, I know people whine about their releases a lot in the past decade, but they still make much better games than 99% of the game companies out there, so I don't care. Anyways, naturally, when they announced their game Redfall at E3 2021 with a CGI trailer, people seemed to be somewhat interested in what they were cooking, and the studio went all out saying that this was going to be their next big title and that this was going to feel like a true Arcane game. Expectations were pretty high, though there was already some people who did not really care for the overall vibe of Redfall, even with the CGI trailer. And when the game did release 2 years later, it was one of the worst games to release of this decade. Metacritic in the mid-50s, a technical mess of a game through and through, and one of the most generic and boring stories and settings of any video game I've ever played. And yes, me and Elijah beat this game. There's a full video of our experience playing this game 2 years after it launched or whenever we did the video. And it was not a good game. It was really boring. And even then was still very buggy and we ran into a lot of issues. Nonetheless, since since this is a video about studios that got killed by their games, you can probably guess what happened to Arcane Austin. And that does bear the question, what happened? How does a studio go from making a high-rated game like Prey 2017 to a buggy vampire shooter like Redfall that kills the entire studio with it? And well, I'm about to answer the question, I guess. Honestly, it all started even before Prey 2017 really released, because ZeniMax, the parent company of Bethesda and also Arcane Austin with that, made a general push for games as a service with all their studios. They figured that life as a service is the next big thing, and if they force this onto all their studios, they're gonna make more money. And that's when we got Fallout 76, for example. And shortly after Prey 2017 release, Arcane Austin was also tasked with making a live service game to broaden appeal and to make that money from microtransactions that, you know, ZeniMax is now after. This was a complete mismatch from day one with what Arcane Austin just had established themselves as, a strong single-player studio. And with that change, the studio started falling apart internally. A staggering 70% of the staff who made Prey left during Redfall's development. As part of that, all the veterans who understood Arcane's way of making single-player games and, you know, probably had some good input on Prey 2017 didn't want anything to do with a live service game like Redfall, and they just left. Also, hiring new people was kind of hard, because people would apply with a game like Prey in mind, and then they would find out that it was a live service slop game like Redfall. They didn't really want to work on it either. So to fill the gaps, they had to rely on external support and outsourcing, which obviously then it's not an Arcane Austin game at all anymore, and you know, it loses even more of its feel and it dilutes the studio's vision even more. And what's crazy is that during the 2021 buyout of Microsoft, developers later went on record saying that they literally hoped Microsoft would look at Redfall and cancel the entire project. Like, they were praying for Microsoft to put them out of their misery. That's how bad it was. But instead of Microsoft like doing that, they let ZeniMax keep running themselves, basically. They took a hands-off approach and they didn't really audit Redfall or any projects they're working on, and they didn't really ask if this was a game worth making at all. The only thing they really did is just cancel the PS5 version of Redfall. But another change that happened during this time was that they did also scale back on the microtransactions, since games like Avengers tried the same thing and failed. So now the main reason for this being a live service game were kind of like gone or minimized, but the rest of the game, like its core,
shedding tears on Instagram. A lot of people reacting to it.
What was once a scrappy little free-to-play battle royale has now become one of the biggest IPs in not just gaming, but any media, really. Fortnite to me feels like the first live service game to truly win. And this is a hard metric for live services because by definition, they are indefinite. It's hard to measure that moment where they've officially done it, where they've officially succeeded, because there's always the question of how well they will do in the long term, in the future.
Howdy, how's it going? My name is Benji Pie. The Mortal Kombat 1 Definitive Edition is out, and if you aren't some super gamer nerd, you're probably thinking, Ben, what the hell does that mean? It means that support for Mortal Kombat 1 is basically coming to an end. Apparently, it's because they didn't sell enough for Combat Pack 2, but the only way to get that was by purchasing the Chaos Reigns expansion. And just checking over my notes a little bit here, oh my goodness, the DLC was $50. How is that anywhat justified? You could also spend $70 to get early access to the expansion just 1 week early, but you would still have to wait for guest fighters to be added later on. So ultimately, you're just burning money. But it wasn't just lack of sales that hurt MK1. A lack of content, a very disappointing story, and an overhyped DLC definitely didn't do it any favors. In this video, I want to talk about Mortal Kombat as a whole. Might throw a little bit of my own experiences in there, might talk about the studio behind Mortal Kombat, NetherRealm Studios. So grab a snack, maybe some popcorn or something. Don't forget a drink and get comfy, because you're going to watch the sad end of Mortal Kombat 1. I played a lot of Mortal Kombat over the years, albeit not at the time that each game was released, but the first game that I really played a lot of was Mortal Kombat vs. DC. It's definitely not the greatest, but it was amazing for a kid like me. I really like superheroes. After, I played a lot of Mortal Kombat 9, which really set the standard of what to expect for a video game. You have a complete story, unlockable characters, some DLC characters. You know, sadly there was an exclusive, but I was kind of used to that already with Soul Calibur. I remember you could play as Yoda on the Xbox 360 and I think Darth Vader on PlayStation, and they also had Link in one of the games at one point. But after really getting into MK9, my cousins introduced me to the prior titles since they had all the old PlayStation games. I played a lot of Armageddon, got to see the epic cutscene that takes place on the Pyramid of Argus, see the endless amount of characters that, looking back, were very copy and paste in terms of movesets, but it really didn't matter. The game itself was just fun. I also did a little bit of racing on the side, can't forget that, that was very fun. I even got to play the original Mortal Kombat 1, 2, and 3 at an arcade, and I'll say, I don't know how you old heads did it back in the day, but I give you major props because I am trash at those. After Mortal Kombat 9 was released, NetherRealm cooked up Injustice: Gods Among Us. It was pretty fun, decent story, interesting mechanics. I enjoyed playing as the Flash a lot, but it was different from the Mortal Kombat series. It was something to keep you occupied while you were waiting for the next installment, Mortal Kombat X. MKX's gameplay is very fast, at least that's what a lot of people like to claim. The fatalities were very gory, and the new characters added felt like they belonged in Mortal Kombat. But we did also get a bunch of crossover characters. Living towers, test your luck, test your might, everything good about MK9 was added into MKX, and I just really enjoyed that. And then we have MK11. It started the slight decline overall. We got a lot more crossover characters, we got a pretty messy story, and the main piece of the game, being a fighting game, was turned into a not so fun combat system. The DLC story was hit or miss at certain points. Overall, it's good. I would say the story overall is very fun to watch, but it seemed like the franchise was starting to crack. We did get a little bit of customization, I'll always appreciate that, but it was a bit limited. Going into Mortal Kombat 1, I had some expectations. I was hyped. I pre-ordered the game, got the deluxe edition. I couldn't wait to get my hands on it. I was even playing the beta at one point. I'm not some insane fighting game player. I never went pro in Street Fighter or something. I'm just a casual that loves unlocking rewards and beating games. Pretty simple. So what went wrong with Mortal Kombat 1? The first noticeable problem is Invasions. Invasions is the PvE mode we got this time around, but from my experience, you're dealing with bosses that have armor, you're forced to use your special items sometimes, and it's typically very broken, but it has a little bit of, a limited use, and sometimes you can do little side objectives every now and again. The only way to access Test Your Might and Endurance, which are the only extra modes, is just through Invasions. There are certain bosses with extremely cheap moves, like this Raiden was able to cover the entire screen with one move, and it just forces you to block the whole time. What the fuck is this? Dude, how the fuck are you supposed to win that? This smoke was able to go completely invisible and still had armor. And if you don't know, the reason many people like myself may not like armor is because when you hit someone, they aren't stunned. They can just take the hit and then hit you back, but you don't have armor, so it's not really fair. And for some areas in fights, you have to dodge projectiles, which is survive. But it's nearly impossible for some of these, it felt like. And from what I can tell, they made them optional, which is good. I think originally people complained that they were too easy, so they made them even harder, but altogether it's just not that fun. There just isn't much variety in the mode, and you spend your time doing the same thing over and over and over. On top of that, it requires an internet connection, so if you're like me and you lag out of the match, it won't count your progress. That is probably the most annoying thing that's happened to me. Invasions wasn't very engaging when the game first launched, and it doesn't seem to be any better now. Oh, by the way, crossplay wasn't in the game on launch, it was added later. Other fighting games like Street Fighter 6 had it day one, but I will say that doesn't bother me as much because I don't like playing online. I suck. I wanted to try and platinum the game, but on launch getting 5 million score in the Towers of Time was next to impossible for me. So I tried recently, since I was making this video, and actually got it. A tip for anyone getting this trophy, specifically the 5 million score, is play one of the hourly towers, do the same brutality every time, and do not lose a single match or round. It also has to be a tower that has 7 people to fight. You do this, and you should hopefully get it. I did it, and I researched it by going through like 1,000 gajillion Reddit threads, and they gave me all the info I needed. I'm not a magician or whatever. I'm not smart like that. On a positive note, one of the best parts about this game, and it wasn't even added on launch, it was added much later, is Floyd. His intro is sick. The way to fight him is in reference to the first Mortal Kombat, where you had to meet a bunch of insanely difficult requirements like flawless twice in a row on the pit without blocking, and a silhouette has to go past the full moon, or something like that. Very difficult, but that's your way to fight Reptile. It's a nod to that game. For Floyd, you can either do all 37 challenges and hope that this pop-up appears for 10 of them, or you can just go to a tracker website and input your username for your platform and just do the 10 that you need. Everyone's is different, and I highly suggest you do the ones that require specific characters first, because you only have 3 tries for fighting Floyd. If you lose, you will have to redo the challenges or wait until your 500th fight to get another chance. If you beat Floyd, you get skins, a bunch of other stuff, but most importantly, you get this sexy ass looking map. It would have been even cooler if you could unlock Floyd as a playable character, but that sounds like a little too much fun for NetherRealm. They wouldn't even let you unlock the Cyber Smoke skin, even though he is a character you fight in Invasions and in the story. It's a noticeable issue that you cannot do brutalities and fatalities on certain characters because they still, after 2 years, have not fully coded them. They just kind of pop into blood. It really bothers me that MK1 doesn't have every type of fatality. They have animalities, which are pretty fun, but it would be nice to get babyalities, friendships, and even stage fatalities. We don't even have those. Don't get me wrong, some of the animalities can be very clever, but some of the other ones are pretty basic. It's like a tiger or lion or whatever that like eats you, or a bear or something like that. That's not as cool as a phoenix. I can't show most of them because they're incredibly gory, but take my word for it. When you look between all the games going from MK9 to MK1, I'm including the Injustice series as well, you wonder why they don't reuse their best ideas. Tag teaming would have been great this time around. The cameo system is just plain out terrible. It was definitely an idea, but it was something that people really did not enjoy. Cameos make sense for the story, but they don't make sense for online play at all. Tag team is so much more fun. It makes the matches longer, but it's far more interesting than spamming one singular button over and over. Injustice 2 had it pretty good with all the different gear pieces, and I didn't really like the whole random chance of getting items, but that's something that you can tweak. We have one gear slot. It barely changes a thing now. I don't want, stats for each item and all that sort of stuff. We don't need that. That's kind of unnecessary, but I would like to be able to change more on each character. If you wanted to, Invasions could change the stats for the item, but only in Invasions. Some of the customization for characters isn't even noticeable, so you just never get to see it. It would be far more interesting to be able to customize different pieces and specs of each thing, and I know that we don't exactly have that because in Injustice 2 there's no fatalities, so clearly it's not going to be that way. But come on, man, come on. Why was the crypt not in this game? The shrine could stay. I understand why we have it. It's a little bit easier, maybe if people don't want to explore, but maybe the crypt could offer something that the shrine didn't have. The crypt is something that should never be missing in any of the Mortal Kombat games because it's very enjoyable. Obviously, some of the time it can be boring or annoying or whatever, but it's something else to do. It's PvE offline content that's just chill, and a lot of people enjoy that. We also have no clear way to be able to access Test Your Might. You have to go through Invasions and find it to be able to do that. There's no towers from what I can find. We can't even play Test Your Sight, Test Your Strike, Test Your Luck. You would have the opportunity to add special skins, items, literally anything for people that wanted to complete that, but it's not like you're forced to, it's optional. And finally, this leads to the two main reasons as to why Mortal Kombat 1, or even Mortal Kombat in general, has started to decline or fail. I gave it its flowers, okay? I said Floyd is cool because Floyd is very cool. There's some parts about the game that are very interesting. I do like some of the colors for characters. I don't understand why we have something like Jean-Claude Van Damme, but we have it. I do like some of the crossover characters. I enjoy a lot of pieces of this game, but overall, these are the two main reasons why it started to fail. DLC and the story. We'll start with DLC first. Combat Pack 1 was drip-fed to the fullest, and there was no denying it. Someone had the bright idea to sell main fighters and cameo fighters one after the next. And I think it went month by month. At first, everyone was super hyped for Omni-Man because that was the first to get released. And that hype would have lasted far longer if it wasn't for the next release that was Tremor as a cameo fighter. Janet Cage was another cameo fighter when in reality it should just be Johnny Cage with a skin to look like Janet Cage. We have Jean-Claude Van Damme as a skin. It's possible to do this. You also have characters like Quan Chi and Ermac being sold as DLC when they're in the base game story. And then there's Movado and Darius. I don't know Movado at all. I don't think he's in the story. I've never seen him. But what I do know is Darius is in the base game story as well. And you face off against him. Funnily enough, you can buy all the cameo fighters separately, so take $10 off the price for Combat Pack 1. You can't play as them, you barely interact with them, there is nothing interesting about cameo fighters. If you couldn't tell, I don't like the cameo system at all. They should not have been included in Combat Pack 1. It would have made way more sense to allow people to unlock cameo fighters for free rather than forcing them to pay money for it. Besides that, you have Combat Pack 2 in the Chaos Reigns expansion. Not only is the DLC story boring, but the fact that it's a $50 DLC is laughable. And at first, you weren't even able to buy characters separately. So they tricked people, or made them at least believe that it wasn't going to happen. So some people were just buying the DLC for $50 instead of, say, spending $7 on one character that they may have liked. You were able to get Sector, Cyrax, and Noob Saibot on launch, but you had to wait for the crossover characters later on. They also added one last cameo fighter, and that's Madame Bo, but she isn't included in that cameo character DLC pack that we talked about. You have to purchase her separately. The Chaos Reigns expansion would have made a lot of sense to include Noob, Sector, Cyrax, literally anyone else that's in there potentially. You could add more Mortal Kombat characters that are in the story somehow, I don't know. But make the entire bundle way cheaper and take out everything else. Then we could have gotten Combat Pack 2, which would have a bunch of other characters, but would also include the T-1000, Ghostface, and Conan. Makes a lot of sense. I don't know if I'm just super intelligent or maybe I'm coming off as stupid. Am I stupid? I don't know. Let me know. Overall, it felt like crossover characters were the main focus when it came to DLC. It's like the Fortnite-ification, if we want to use that as a word, for games. They want to make a ton of money and think that doing collabs all the time would mean that the game would end up having a bunch of gajillion dollars spent on it. You have to make the core parts of the game good before really going into collaborations. If MK1 was fleshed out, crossover characters are like the cherry on top, but since they still added them, yet the game felt unfinished, it seemed like NetherRealm was just trying to get as much money as possible because they knew the game had failed. And now we have the story. I decided to replay it. I went through all the cutscenes and everything, just so it would be, you know, fresh in my mind. And good golly, oh my God, it is worse than I imagined. But let's give a little bit of context to the overall story, because regardless of timeline resets and stuff, we're still on one continuous path. At least that's kind of how I see it. There is the original timeline, which ends in Armageddon. Through MK9, we are to believe that everyone besides Shao Kahn is dead. As he is about to kill Raiden, Raiden casts a spell with a message to his past self in order to avoid this crisis.
He must win.
This is the start to MK9. Mortal Kombat 2011 is all about slightly changing certain events, but some of the time, those events are replaced by something else, if not worse. Two very big examples. Instead of Smoke being taken and becoming a part of the Cyber Initiative within the Lin Kuei, Raiden prevents it and Sub-Zero is then forced to become a robot. Another example is Motaro originally kills Johnny Cage, but in this new timeline, Raiden prevents that by body slamming the fuck out of him. And since Motaro was killed and Johnny Cage didn't die, Sindel is granted the power of Shang Tsung, and I believe Shang Tsung dies here, and she goes on to finish what Motaro could not. This leads to quite possibly the worst fight scene to date. I don't think a single person here actually uses their abilities besides Nightwolf at the very end. I really do not like that in some of these cutscenes, but everyone fights Sindel one by one, and Sindel kills all of them, besides the two humans, Johnny and Sonya. And all of this happened because for some reason, Raiden wanted to take Liu Kang with him to see the Elder Gods. There was legit no reason. Liu Kang didn't even talk. But okay, let's skip forward a little bit. MK9 ends with Shao Kahn's defeat, and now we're in MKX. This is where the story gets, at least it starts to get a little messy. MKX has comics that are intertwined in the story, and there are a lot of jumps, past and present, and all that sort of stuff. Would have been okay with the comics existing as long as it was possible to read them through the game, but sadly, you couldn't do that. You had to go